The night my grandson called me just a retired janitor in front of his father, I didn't say a word. I just set down my coffee cup, looked at my son-in-law, and watched him laugh. That was 3 weeks before everything changed. My name is Walter. I am 64 years old. I live alone in a 2-bedroom house outside Knoxville, Tennessee, on a 1/4-acre lot with a garden my late wife started and I've kept going for 11 years now. From the outside, I imagine I look like exactly what people expect a man my age to look like. I move slowly in the morning. I wear the same 3 flannel shirts in rotation. I go to the same diner on Tuesday and Thursday, order the same eggs, tip the same waitress. I don't talk much. I never did. My daughter married a man named Craig when she was 27. Craig sells commercial real estate in Nashville. He is successful by most measures: nice house, newer truck every 2 years, the kind of confidence that fills a room before he does. He is not a bad man. I want to be clear about that. But he is the kind of man who measures other men by what they can show, and what I showed him, from the first Thanksgiving I sat at his table, was very little. A quiet father-in-law from East Tennessee. A widower. A man who drove a 10-year-old Silverado and didn't own a suit that fit right anymore. He was never cruel to me directly. It was always smaller than that. The way he'd redirect a conversation I'd started. The way he'd answer a question someone asked me before I had the chance. The way he'd say, in that easy, smooth voice of his, "Walter, you probably wouldn't know about this, but," and then explain something I understood better than he ever would. My daughter, whose name is Anne, saw it. She always saw it. She'd catch my eye across the table and give me a look that was half apology and half something else. Something like frustration, but not at me. I'd shake my head just slightly. It didn't matter. I had learned, a long time ago, how to let things pass over me without leaving a mark. But the night my grandson said what he said, I felt something shift. Not anger. More like a door opening somewhere inside me that I had kept shut for a long time. His name is Tyler. He's 14. He's a good kid, mostly. The way 14-year-olds are good kids, meaning the goodness is in there. But it's buried under everything else that age pours on top of it. We'd been at the dinner table, Craig's dining room, the kind of table that seats 10 for a family of 4. Craig had been talking about a deal he'd closed that week. Something about square footage and cap rates that I didn't follow and wasn't meant to. Tyler had asked me what I did before I retired, and before I could answer, Craig had said, "Grandpa Walter worked for the government, bud." Maintenance. He'd said it the way you'd say it to a child, simple and final, like the subject was done. And Tyler, looking at me with that teenage directness that doesn't yet know how to account for other people's feelings, said, "So you were like a janitor?" Craig laughed. Not a mean laugh. Just a laugh. I said, "Something like that." Anne put her fork down. I shook my head at her, barely. She picked it back up. I drove home that night on I-40 with the windows cracked even though it was October. The cold air coming in, the kind of night where the dark between the highway lights feels very wide. I wasn't angry. I was tired in a specific way, not the tired of age or of a long day, but the tired of having been invisible for so long that you start to wonder whether you made yourself that way on purpose, or whether it just happened and you never noticed. I had made myself that way on purpose. I knew that, it was a choice I'd made 30 years ago and renewed every year since. The way you renew a subscription without thinking too hard about whether you still want it. Some choices become part of you so slowly that by the time they're finished, you can't tell where the choice ends and the man begins. I had served 26 years in Army Special Forces. I left as a master sergeant. I had been in places whose names I still don't say out loud in casual conversation, done things that are classified in files that will outlive me, and come home each time to the same woman, the same house, the same quiet. My wife knew. She had always known she was the one who helped me understand, in the early years, that the work and the life were 2 separate things, and that keeping them separate was not dishonesty, it was survival. When she died, I kept the separation out of habit, and then out of something I didn't have a good name for. Not shame. Not exactly. More like the understanding that the man I had been in those years was not a man most people could comfortably share a dinner table with, and that it was easier for everyone, including me, if he stayed where I'd put him. Craig didn't know. Anne didn't know the full of it. She knew I'd been in the army, knew I'd been deployed, but I'd never given her specifics and she'd never pushed. She had grown up watching me be quiet about it, and had learned the way children learn the rules of a house, that this was simply how things were. That was my doing. I owned it. But driving home that October night, I thought about Tyler's face when he said what he said. Not cruelty in it. Just the acceptance of a version of me that had been handed to him and that he had no reason to question. That bothered me more than Craig's laugh. I didn't sleep much. I lay in the bed my wife and I had shared for 31 years and looked at the ceiling and thought about a thing my old team sergeant had said to me once, in a debrief room in a place I won't name, after an operation that had gone wrong in the specific way that operations sometimes go wrong, not catastrophically, but in the way that makes you reassess every assumption you brought in with you. He'd said, "The problem with making yourself small, Walt, is that the people around you start to believe it. And then you have to decide whether their belief is more comfortable than the truth." I hadn't known what to do with that then. I thought I did now. I didn't decide anything that night. I just stopped renewing the subscription. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday morning in early November, I was in the garden, cutting back the dead growth before the first hard freeze, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Anne. It was 4 words and a punctuation mark. Dad. 3 knocks. Home. I stood up straight in the garden. The pruning shears were still in my hand. I read it again. 3 knocks was something Anne and I had set up years ago, after her mother died, as a way for her to tell me she needed me without alarming Craig or the kids. We'd established it quietly, the way people who've grown up in houses with rules establish things without ceremony. Just a word and a nod one afternoon when Craig was traveling and she'd called me upset about something she didn't want to explain over the phone. It had never been used at full signal before. 1 knock meant she was thinking of me. 2 meant she wanted to talk. 3 meant come now and don't ask questions until you're inside. I pulled off my garden gloves. I went inside. I washed my hands because the habit is deeper than urgency in a man my age. I picked up my keys. I drove to Nashville. It is 3 hours and 15 minutes from my house to hers if you don't stop. I didn't stop. I called her twice on the way and got no answer. I texted once. No response. I did not panic. I had been trained, over a great many years, to treat the absence of information as information of its own kind, and to work with what I had, rather than with what I feared. What I had was, my daughter had sent me an emergency signal at 9 in the morning on a Thursday when Craig was supposed to be at work and the kids were supposed to be at school. What I feared was a separate list that I kept behind a door in my mind and did not open while I was driving. I pulled off the interstate at her exit at noon. Her neighborhood is the kind of subdivision that all looks the same, from the street brick fronts, 2-car garages, manicured lawns going brown in November. I turned onto her street and drove slowly. Craig's truck was in the driveway. That was the first thing I noted. He was supposed to be in a closing meeting in Brentwood until 2. I parked at the curb 2 houses down, not in front of hers. Old habit. I sat for a moment. The street was quiet in the way that suburban streets are quiet on a weekday. A delivery truck somewhere in the distance, a dog barking twice and then stopping. Nothing wrong on the surface. The surface has never been where the information is. I got out of the truck. I walked to the side of her house rather than the front, another habit, and went around to the back door, which she has always kept with a hide-a-key under the 3rd stepping stone from the patio edge. It was still there. I let myself in. The kitchen was clean. Coffee maker still on. 1 mug on the counter. I heard voices from the front room. One voice raised, one voice low. I knew both of them. I did not rush. I stood in the kitchen and I listened for 30 seconds the way I had been taught to listen, not just for words, but for pitch, for the gaps between words, for breathing, for what the body tells you when the voice is trying to tell you something different. Craig was not calm. He was doing the voice men use when they want to sound in control of something they are not in control of. I had heard that voice in many rooms in many countries over the years, and it means the same thing everywhere. Anne's voice was low, careful, the voice of someone choosing every word the way you choose your footing on uncertain ground. I walked into the front room. They both stopped. Craig looked at me. Anne looked at me with something in her face that was relief and apprehension together, the particular combination of someone who sent for help and is now watching it arrive. "Walter," Craig said. He recovered quickly. I'll give him that. "What are you doing here?" "Anne called me," I said. "I texted," Anne said. "Right," I said. "Same thing." Craig's jaw tightened. He looked at Anne. "You called your father." "I did. Because we were having a conversation." "We weren't having a conversation, Craig." I looked between them. I looked at my daughter and the specific way she was standing, weight distributed, shoulders not quite squared, the posture of a person who is holding something carefully and has been for a while. Then I looked at Craig and the way he was standing in the center of the room, the way people stand when they believe the room belongs to them. "What's happening?" I asked Anne directly. She looked at Craig once. Then she looked at me. "He wants me to sign paperwork to refinance the house without going through the joint review process." I asked him to wait and include me in the full review, and she paused. "He didn't want to wait." Craig exhaled sharply. "It's a financial decision, Walter. A straightforward one." She's what?" I said. The room got quiet. Craig blinked. I don't think many people had interrupted him mid-sentence in quite some time. "She's overthinking it," he said. I nodded slowly. I looked around the room once the room he filled, the room with his furniture, his television, his commission awards framed on the wall. Then I looked back at him. "Craig," I said, "I want to tell you something. And I want you to listen the way you'd listen, if it mattered to you." He looked at me the way he always did, the slightly patient, slightly tolerant look of a man humoring someone he's already made up his mind about. "Sure, Walter. When I was 31 years old," I said, "I spent 4 months in an environment where making the wrong decision under pressure meant people died. Not hypothetically. People I knew. People I'd eaten breakfast with." I paused. "I learned what it looks like when someone is trying to rush a decision past another person's judgment. I learned it very well." Craig's expression shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. "That's..." He stopped. "The thing about pressure," I said, "is that it only works on people who don't recognize it. Anne recognizes it. She recognized it when she texted me this morning." "That's worth something." Silence. "What exactly did you do in the army?" Craig asked. His voice had changed. "Not a lot. But enough." "I worked for the government," I said. "Maintenance." Anne made a sound that was almost a laugh. She caught it. Craig stood in the center of the room for another moment. Then he picked up the folder of paperwork he'd left on the coffee table, the papers he'd been trying to get signed, and he set it down on the side table instead of in front of Anne. It was a small movement. It was the right movement. "I'll get a full review scheduled," he said. "Both of us." "Thank you," Anne said. Craig looked at me for a moment longer. "You want coffee, Walter?" "I'd appreciate that," I said. We sat in the kitchen, the three of us, and Craig made coffee the way Anne had taught him the right grind, the right amount, and we talked about Tyler's school and the property Craig was closing and the first freeze coming to Knoxville that week. Normal conversation. The kind that fills a kitchen on a November afternoon and doesn't require anyone to be anything other than what they are right now, in this room. But something had moved in that front room that did not move back. I drove home that evening with the windows up this time. It was dark by 5, the way it gets in November, the hills outside Knoxville going black against a sky that was just barely still blue at the edges. I had the radio off. I was thinking about my wife, the way I do on drives like that, not her absence, which I've made peace with in the way you make peace with things you can't change, but her presence in the smaller moments. She would have said I took too long. She had always thought that about me, that I held things too carefully, kept them too wrapped up. She wasn't wrong. She would have also said that Craig wasn't the problem, that he was just a man who had been handed a picture of me and had no reason to question it because I had never given him one. That was fair. It was fair, and I knew it. The next Sunday, Anne brought the kids over to my house for the afternoon, which she did maybe once a month, a habit from when she was in college, and would come home for a Sunday, and I'd grill whatever was in the freezer, and we'd sit on the back porch until it got cold. Tyler was quiet when they arrived. He'd been in the truck with Anne, and I wondered what she'd told him on the way over, if anything. I grilled chicken. I made the cornbread my wife used to make from her mother's recipe, the one with the cast iron skillet and the butter you put in while the iron is still hot so it soaks in from the bottom up. Tyler ate 2 pieces without being asked. After the younger one, my granddaughter, Maisie, who is 9 and has more energy than anyone I have met in 64 years of meeting people, went inside to use the tablet. Tyler stayed on the porch. He sat in the chair that used to be his grandmother's, the wooden rocker with the faded green cushion, and looked out at the garden. "Grandpa," he said after a while. "Yeah, Mom said you were in the army." I was. Like, in the regular army? I looked out at the garden. The frost had come Wednesday night, the first real one. The tomato plants were finished. The kale was still going. Kale doesn't mind cold. "Special Forces," I said. Tyler was quiet for a moment. "For how long?" 26 years. He processed that. I could see him doing the math, the way teenagers do when numbers mean something to them. He stopped. Started again. "Were you deployed?" "Several times." "Did you?" He stopped again. "You can ask," I said. "I might not answer everything." "But you can ask?" He nodded. He rocked the chair once, slowly. "Did you ever have to do things you didn't want to do?" I thought about that for a moment. It was the question I'd have expected from someone twice his age, which told me he'd been thinking about it for longer than just this afternoon. "Yes," I said. "How do you deal with that?" "Poorly, sometimes," I said. "Then better. Then you find a version of it you can carry." He nodded again. We were quiet for a while. The last of the light was going over the ridge west of the house, that November light that's more orange than gold, low and sharp. "I didn't know," he said. "About what you did." "I know you didn't." I said something dumb. "You said something with the information you had," I said. "That's different from dumb." He looked at me. "Is it?" "Information changes. Dumb is a pattern. You got new information. Now you'll do something different with it." He thought about that. Then he said, "Dad didn't know either, did he?" It wasn't quite a question. "Your dad's a good man," I said. "He just had a picture of me that wasn't the whole picture. Some of that was my doing." "Why didn't you tell people?" I looked out at the garden for a moment. At the kale, still green against the frozen ground. At the raised beds my wife had built and I had maintained, the same as she'd left them. Same dimensions, same spacing, though the plants were all different now, changed out season by season. "Because the work I did needed to stay separate from the rest of my life," I said. "And then it was a habit." And then I paused. Then I thought it was simpler. "Was it?" "Simpler, yes," I said. "Better, I'm not sure." He rocked the chair again. "Mom cried on the way over here," he said. "She doesn't think I noticed." "Anne cries when something matters to her," I said. "She always has." "Nothing wrong with that. She said you showed up for her this week." "That's what you do," I said. He was quiet again. Then, will you tell me more? About what you did? Some of it, I said. The parts that are mine to tell. Okay, he said. Okay, I said. Maisie came back out and wanted to show us both something on the tablet, some video about a dog learning tricks, and Tyler leaned over to look with her and made a comment that made her laugh. And I sat in my chair and watched the two of them in the orange late light and felt something that had been tight in my chest for a long time ease a little. Not resolve. Just ease. The way a thing does when you stop bracing against it. Craig called me the following week. Tuesday night, which surprised me. I was at the diner, just finishing up, and I stepped outside to take the call in the parking lot with the phone against my ear and the cold coming in from the north. He said he'd been thinking about what I'd said. He didn't apologize. Exactly, Craig is not a man who apologizes in straight lines, but he said he'd looked some things up after that Sunday. About special forces. About what a master sergeant actually does. What it actually takes. What those years actually look like. I didn't have context, he said. For who you are. You had the context I gave you, I said. That's on me too. A pause. Tyler asked me if he could go to Knoxville next weekend. Just you and him. He's welcome here anytime he wants. I know, Craig said. I told him that. Another pause. Longer. Walter, he said. I want to. He stopped. Start it again. I'm going to do better. With Anne. I just want you to know that. I stood in the parking lot. The lights from the diner were yellow in the dark behind me. Somewhere across the road, a car was running, just idling in a parking lot like mine, its headlights on. I believe you, I said. I didn't say more than that. I didn't need to. Some things land harder when you don't bury them in words. Tyler came the following Saturday. He slept in the room that used to be Anne's, with the same quilt his grandmother had made in the 90s from fabric squares she'd collected over 20 years of buying clothes for Anne and never throwing away the remnants. We spent the morning in the garden, and I showed him the winter prep, how you cut back and mulch, what you leave and what you pull, how you're already thinking about spring even when everything looks like it's dying. He asked good questions. He got dirt on his shoes and didn't complain about it. In the afternoon, I took him to the garage where I have, on the wall above the workbench, a series of photographs that have never been in the main house. Not hidden, anyone who came out here could see them. Just separate. A habit of separation. Some of the photographs are just landscapes, places I'd been. A couple are with men whose faces I've blurred in the reprints, at their request and mine. One is a unit photo from 1987 that I have never explained to anyone, and that I did not explain to Tyler that day, but that he looked at for a long time. There is one photograph of me at 38, in gear, taken by someone on my team before an operation I have not fully processed even now. I don't know why I kept it on the wall. Maybe because it is the most honest picture that exists of me, not of what I did, but of what I was prepared to do. There is nothing glamorous in it. Just a man in his late 30s, lean and focused and very still, who understood exactly what the next several hours were going to require. Tyler looked at it for a long time. That's you, he said. That's me. How old? 38. He looked from the photo to me and back. I watched him doing the thing that people do when they try to reconcile two versions of the same person, the one in front of them and the one preserved in a photograph, and the years between. You look... He stopped. Younger, I offered. No, he said. I mean, yes. But that's not... He shook his head. You look like you knew exactly what you were doing. I did, I said. For better and worse, I did. He nodded slowly. He kept looking at the photograph. Tyler, I said. I want to tell you something. He looked at me. The man in that photograph and the man standing here in this garage are the same man. All the things in between are part of it too. The garden and the diner and the truck and the flannel shirt. I paused. Don't ever let someone's picture of you be the whole story. But don't let your own picture of yourself be the whole story either. You're 14. You've got a long way to go to find out what you're made of. That's a good thing. That's the best possible thing. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Did Grandma know? The whole picture?" "Yes," I said. "She always knew." "Was that hard?" "The opposite," I said. "It was the easiest thing in my life." He nodded. He understood something in that. I could see it. Not the full thing, you don't fully understand that kind of thing at 14. Maybe you don't even fully understand it at 64. But the shape of it. The outline. We went inside and I made chili on the stove, the way I'd made it since before Anne was born. With the dried chiles, you have to rehydrate in warm water first, and the piece of dark chocolate you put in at the end that Anne always thought was strange until she had it enough times that it started to taste right to her. Tyler had 2 bowls. He did the dishes without being asked. Before he went to bed, he stood in the doorway of the kitchen and said, "I'm sorry." About what I said at dinner. The janitor thing. "I know," I said. "I shouldn't have." "You were working with what you had," I said. "Now you've got more." He nodded. He went to bed. I sat up for a while at the kitchen table, the way I do on nights when sleep isn't ready for me yet, with the lamp on and the house quiet, and the kind of silence that a house full of good history makes when everyone in it is settled. Not empty silence. The other kind. I thought about what my old team sergeant had said. About making yourself small and what it costs. I thought about my wife, who had never let me be small to her. Not once. Who had looked at the man in that photograph, and the man at the dinner table, and the man in the garden, and held all 3 of them at once without requiring me to explain how they fit together, because she had always understood that they fit because they were all the same man, all the time, and that a person can carry a great deal without showing any of it as long as there is someone who knows what they're carrying. She had been that person. And when she left, I had started, slowly, to forget that the carrying didn't require hiding. That quiet was a choice, not an obligation. That the people at my table deserved to know, if not everything, then more than nothing. I am 64 years old. I have made most of my big choices. But there are still small ones, made every day, and small ones accumulate the same way everything else does. I turned off the kitchen light. I went to bed. In the morning, Tyler was up before me, which I had not expected, and was in the garden with a cup of coffee he had made himself strong enough, I was pleased to note, looking at the kale that was still green and alive in the frozen earth. I stood at the back door with my own cup and watched him for a moment. He turned around and saw me. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. We stood there in the early morning, the cold and the low gray light and the kale standing in the frozen ground the way it does, the way it always does, long after everything else has gone. There is a version of me that the people in my life spent years looking at. A quiet man. A simple man. A retired man with a garden and a truck and a Tuesday diner habit. That version is real. It has always been real. But it is not all of it. And the people who matter to me, the daughter who texted 3 words in the right order on a Thursday morning, the grandson sitting in his grandmother's chair asking the right questions, the son-in-law who looked something up and made a phone call on a Tuesday night, they are learning that now. It is later than it should have been. I own that. But late is not the same as too late. That is something I know, at 64, more certainly than I have known most things. The kale survives the frost. It more than survives it. The cold makes it sweeter. Something about the freeze draws the sugars up through the plant and concentrates them. Most people don't know that. They see the frost and they think it's over. But that's the thing about something that was built right from the start, that was tended correctly from the beginning. The cold doesn't end it. The cold is just another season it was always designed to live through. And if you come back to it in the morning, in the gray early light, still there and still green against all the dead and frozen ground around it, you'll understand something that most people only learn very late, if they ever learn it at all. Quiet is not weakness. Still, water is not shallow water. And the men and women who have been somewhere you can't imagine, who have done things you will never have the context for, who came home and planted a garden and kept the same Tuesday routine and never said a word about any of it. They are not simple people who led small lives. They are people who chose every day to give you the quieter version because you were safe and they loved you, and that was what home was supposed to feel like. And maybe that choice deserved more credit than I gave it. Or maybe it deserved exactly this: a Saturday morning in November, a grandson in the garden with a cup of coffee, the cold air between us, and nothing at all that needed to be said. The people we love most sometimes only see the surface we've chosen to show them, and that's not always their fault. Walter didn't hide out of shame, he hid out of habit. And habits can quietly rob the people around us of the chance to truly know us. It's never too late to let someone in. One honest moment, one real conversation, can shift years of distance into something warm enough to grow in frozen ground. A small note to our viewers: this story was created and written by AI, crafted to bring you an entertaining listen while carrying a message worth holding on to.